The gitignore file, what it is and how to use it.
You are programming with Palermo. You deliver software. You need to move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence. Stay tuned for timeless solutions, simple methods, and topics that will propel you forward. And now your host, lifelong programmer, author, teacher, coach, Christian, and charismatic speaker, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to Programming with Palermo. Today on the show, we're going to look through the gitignore file, what it is in your Git repository, how to use it, how to make sense of it, and what it looks like if you've got it wrong. Because there are some specific symptoms if you've got it wrong. Every repository needs a gitignore file, and if you find yourself seeing code changes to files that you just mentally have to remember to ignore, that means that you're missing some entries in your gitignore file. We're going to show you what it is, walk you through, show you what it looks like if some things are missing, and let's get into it. So let's dive into this gitignore file. Now, we're on the GitHub repository, github.com/Jeffrey Palermo /onionarchitecture.nsx. But if you look at the gitignore file that we have in this repository, and of course, anytime you create a repository on GitHub, they're going to ask you what kind of gitignore file you want or none. And it really depends on the IDE you're using or the tooling that you're using, because every tool is going to have different files that it uses that it puts in that directory, but you don't want those files to be checked in. So the purpose of the gitignore is to literally tell the Git client to ignore these types of files and don't suggest them to me to add or to send over to the repository and share with my teammates. And so just a quick browsing through this gitignore, this is pretty much the stock gitignore file. Over time, you're gonna create some new things, and I've added some things to it. But look, you can see the stock one here, and GitHub maintains a Visual Studio gitignore file. SUO, that binary file, the .user files, those are going to be hidden. The Cobertura code coverage files for testing is going to be hidden. And of course, build results. So debug, release, x86, x64, bin, and of course the brackets are for uppercase, lowercase. But all of these are kind of regular expression-like syntax, but we don't want the bin folders, we don't want the OBJ folders, we don't want MS test results, even older things like Visual Studio 2017 did some generated files. And as we go through here, you're going to see a lot of tools that you probably don't use, but enough people have used them where they've made their way to this GitHub template. And it really doesn't hurt anything if you just use the template. I do not author a gitignore file on my own. I just use the template because it works. I have done that in the past, hand authored them, but it's just not worth it anymore. And so you can see so many different files where it's a pain if, oh, another one of these cases popped up, let me add gitignore. You'd be managing your gitignore quite a bit. But there's some tools that you might not use, like Chutzpah test files. You might not use Chutzpah. I don't currently use Chutzpah. Visual Studio Profiler, TFS 2012, TeamCity, JetBrains .cover, Axo cover, Visual Studio Code coverage, Mighty Moose. So many add-ins and tools that we don't use. NuGet packages, Microsoft Azure build output. But these are all common things that you typically don't want to put into a repository. ReSharper used to put a lot of files in here, and you can see CodeRush personal settings in there. ReSharper doesn't do that anymore, just right off the bat, but past versions did. So let's just see what happens. I'm opening up the gitignore file. I have my build file. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and open it here. I've added it to my solution items. I tend to like to have in my solution items just some of the top level folders to be at my beck and call. So right now I'm in the master branch and there's nothing to commit. But if I were to go to gitignore and let's just take all this, let's just delete it. And so if we come over here, the gitignore has changed. So if I save it, now the Git client is suggesting that I commit all of these files. there's just a ton of extra files that are produced in the build process by the tooling, and you do not want all these files cluttering up your Git repository.
Programming with Palermo is brought to you by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their software with confidence in Azure. If your team has a project that's too important to be delayed or derailed, ClearMeasure can help while keeping your team in the driver's seat and growing in capability. Click on clearmeasure.com for more information. If you are an architect or .NET engineer aspiring to become an architect, check out clearmeasure.com/careers. Now, back to the show.
So the gitignore file is very important. Do not use Git without a gitignore, because you are going to end up just pushing all of this stuff to the Git repository. And then every time one of your teammates makes a change, well, the client is going to say, oh, these files over here changed. You need to commit an update, a change to these files, but they're just auto-generated. They're just transitory files. And so the .vs folder has a lot of them in there. The build test, a lot of the test results, if you're running your VS test command line, and then every solution has some extra ones. The solution user file. If I were to open the solution user file and just look, you're not going to open it. You're not going to look at this file on your own. It's not for human consumption. And if it's not for human consumption, then it's not source. Okay. Now, a library, a dependency to check in is not source, but let me just close these up. And every project has bin folders that have all kinds of DLLs in them and tools. I'm gonna close that up. And it has an obj folder, OBJ, every single one of your projects. So now you have every single one of your projects with a bin and obj folder, and you're just cluttering up your Git repository. So that's what a gitignore file does for you. If I'm gonna come in here, and I'm gonna just undo and save. And now the Git client automatically says, oh, there's nothing to commit. If you're on a team and you're going through pull requests and you're looking through changes in a pull request to files that you just mentally have to think, oh, let me ignore that. There's nothing to review there. And you're going through the pull request combing for a code change to a file that you do need to review. Well, that's a sign that you're checking in too many files. You need to modify your gitignore file. You need to get some of those purged out of the Git repository. Just delete those out. You're going to have another commit to get rid of those files because they don't need to be in your Git repository anyway because they're cluttering up everything. You need clean pull requests where the only changes from team member to team member are actual changes to source that people can read through and understand. So gitignore, super, super important. Don't have a Git repository without one. Well, there you have it. The gitignore file. Super important. Once you learn how to use it, once you have it in place, you kind of set it and forget it. And every once in a while, you do something new. You have a new tool and you go to commit something and there's an extra file that you actually didn't change that you didn't intend to commit. That's a sign that you need to commit a change to the gitignore file instead of actually committing that new auto-generated file or some other file for a tool that's not really part of the application source. It's just part of your tooling. So again, every Git repository needs a gitignore file. And if you're using Visual Studio, start with the template from GitHub. It just works. Add things as you go along. And if you see a pull request from any of your team members with some changes to some files that you don't understand or look kind of binary or look auto-generated, and in your mind you just think, oh, I just need to skip those and look at the code that they're actually changing instead of these other files that are somehow being checked in. That's a sign that there's things in your Git repository that do not belong. Have that conversation with your team, get those files out of there. You want your pull request to be completely clean so that you're only looking at changes to actual source files that make a difference for the application. Hope that helps. God bless you. Thank you for joining me on Programming with Palermo.
You've been watching Programming with Palermo, your primary place for highly productive programming protocols and practices. Remember, You have what it takes. You can do this. You are a programmer, formed by God Himself and called to this profession for a purpose. You can catch every episode at Palermo.network as well as syndicated locations nationwide. We're so glad you tuned in. Until next time, may God bless you, and thanks for programming with Palermo. Programming with Palermo has made a special arrangement with Marketplace Chaplains. Besides programming challenges, we all face issues in life where we need some help. If you'd like, you can call a chaplain confidentially. To speak with a gentleman, dial 512-923-8178. Or to speak with a lady, dial 512-619-6950. The show won't know you called, and everything is kept in strict secrecy. This is a free service available if you or a friend need it.